My name is George Howson, and today we are here to discuss the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Today, joining me, we have fellow Grid Talk host Tom Downey.
Good afternoon.
And Formula One writer Dev Tyagi.
Hey guys, good to be here.
Good to have you back, Dev. But before we get into this episode, we must first thank our sponsor for the episode, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympic Games, baseball to F1 racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker and unwind with our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free credit bet on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. Also, be sure to follow our social channels at Grid Talk UK to stay up with the show. That's on every social media platform with the @ symbol. So let's dive into this race. Very eventful race, to say the least, and a very much a surprise winner as well, Tom. George Russell making the one-stop strategy work, an absolute treat for him, when most of the other drivers were trying the two-stop strategy. Were you surprised to see that Russell was the only driver to do it? And were you even more surprised to see him actually hold off Sir Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us expected a one-stop to work because there was a lot of talk around the track surface being very fresh, and whilst it was being very grippy, it was sort of chewing up the tires quite a lot. We heard a number of drivers commenting after practice and after quality, just about the state of the tires with the new surface. So seeing Russell sort of just work his car to a point where in this race, it was like, I really didn't think he was going to do it because we saw Hamilton for so long. Obviously, he took the lead at the start of the race, and it looked to be like one of your old school Hamilton commanding victories. But then Russell, you kind of almost forgot about him because he was just quietly there doing his bit, keeping his tires going, just getting so much life out of them. And after all the other drivers pitted for their second stop, some drivers pitted early, like Perez, who I think got a bit shafted by Red Bull with the strategy, and then other drivers who pitted quite late, such as Lando, who got shafted by McLaren, one could ask, although he also lost it on the race start. Shock. It was a really, really impressive drive. The thing that impressed me most about Russell was in those final laps where Hamilton had caught him, because it's one thing to catch a driver, it's another thing to overtake a driver. And seeing George maintain that half a second gap to Hamilton, and Hamilton was on a fresh set of tires, it was really, really impressive. The thing I noticed most of all was coming out of like La Source or coming through the bus stop chicane, the amount of purchase Russell had on those old tires at the end of the race was fascinating. It's testament to just how good his tire management was. I'm not a big Russell fan, as anybody who watches or listens to this knows. Everybody knows I'm not a Russell fan. I'm not a Hamilton fan. I'm not really a Mercedes fan. Nobody can deny how good a victory that was for George Russell today. That, for me, easily the best win of the season in terms of the driver's win. Russell fully earned that victory, and he basically said to Hamilton, look, if you want this win, you're going to have to overtake me on track. And Mercedes evidently went, all right, then we'll just let them scrap it out. We heard on Hamilton's team radio, I think it was like, be careful, or race it, don't be stupid, that kind of thing. And Russell said, perfect. He was like, Lewis, if you want it, you got to come get it. And Lewis didn't get it.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, really, to see him go so long on the hard tires when his engineer was saying with about 20 laps to go whether he thought that, the tires could make the end of the race. I just thought it was a bluff, to be honest, just, like they often do on the radio. But he meant it because he did keep his tires into the end of the race. And like you said, hats off to Mercedes as well for letting them race. It's something that with, especially with Oscar Piastri bearing down on them in the closing stages, they easily could have said, hold station or, Hamilton overtake because he's got a better chance here, but they let them race. And, a Mercedes won too, something that we've not said in a good few years now. Something that was very kind of boring for a long time, but now it's quite exciting because we've not seen it in so long. And yeah, like you said, George Russell, absolutely incredible today. And that kind of leads me on to my next point as well, Dev. Before this race, I was kind of questioning whether, George Russell would be able to lead Mercedes, because presumably it's going to probably be Kimi Antonelli alongside him next season at Mercedes. And therefore, Russell, with how experienced he is and how long he's been in the team, he would be the de facto team leader, or at least expected to be. But I think after today's performance, it's shown that he can be a team leader because he fully merited that win today.
No, absolutely. There's no doubt about that fact. And I mean, when you are giving somebody like seven-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton a run for his money, then I mean, you are that good, and you've clearly proven to the rest of the world that you belong at this elite level of the top flight of Grand Prix racing, as Formula One is called. And I really think that in the course of the future, should Kimi Antonelli finally make it to Mercedes, the signs of which now seem more certain than they ever were before, I think he would be in good hands. He would learn from the guidance of George Russell, who's really authoring this new era of Mercedes, I would say. And I think couldn't have been a better time to move on to the break with a win against his name, because you have to remember that when the season started back at Bahrain, 14 races ago, what did Mercedes actually have? A P5 and a P7. And Toto Wolff was in despair. The team did not really have that kind of the air of confidence, George, which teams actually contest with. There were glaring doubts that, okay, is this actually going to be another, this insipid battle for the midfield dominance? And here you have a Mercedes 1-2. Lewis Hamilton has crossed north of 200 podium finishes. George Russell has just won his third race. He's won 2 this year. He's done something which neither Leclerc or Sainz have done, which is to win more than one Grand Prix this year. And he's really, I think the Mercedes team is now rallying behind George Russell, and great to find Hamilton also picking form at the right time. So I think it's like a double impact at the right time as they head on to this much deserved break.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Dev, and you're absolutely right. George Russell is the first driver this season not called Max Verstappen to get another win, get more than one win. Sorry, let me just
right.
What's that? I'm hearing a noise on my ear. What's that? I don't know if you guys can hear that. I hear a timer. Apologies for that. Yeah, I don't know what was going off there. Anyway, sorry. Get my train of thought back. So yeah, a very eventful race for sure overall. And we were kind of speculating in the preview as well for this, Tom, that Spa really needed a good race. I mean, we obviously had the literal washout in 21. We had 2 not that eventful races, really. We had Verstappen, just kind of plowing through the field like it was nobody's business in the last 2 years. But this race, I feel like it was a really good advertisement for Spa. You had a lot of battles through the field. You had interesting tyre strategy, different tyre strategies. You had a lot of battles, a lot of overtakes throughout the Grand Prix. I think this is the race that Spa really needed, to be honest.
Yeah, it was. I've seen some people saying that it was perhaps a bit boring or something. And whilst it perhaps wasn't sort of overtake after overtake on track, it was a really, really entertaining race in the sense of you didn't really know who was going to win, and then it was it sort of got to the point where it was like, well, Hamilton could win it, and then it was before the race, it was is Perez going to win? Lol, no. It was like, is Leclerc going to win? And then and then it turned into is Russell going to win? And then at the end of the question is Piastri going to win? Because he had great pace in the sort of last stint. Spa's one of those circuits where it reminds me a lot of the Imola race, the start of the season. And what I'm about to say is going to make sense when I mention Imola as well. Imola and Spa have a lot in common in that they are those circuits that drivers adore. And those of us who are, racers and drivers, myself with a racing license, all the rest of it, I love going to places where it's fun to drive. But there is no direct correlation between a fun circuit to drive and an entertaining circuit to watch. And Spa has been a victim of that in recent years, I would say. One of the things I would add is Spa this year. I think if we'd have had as the cars looked at the start of the season, we would have been having a very different conversation. I think it's as much to do with the performance of the cars, and if you look at how close the top of the pack is, if you look at the top four constructors, because they were all in contention, aside from Red Bull, really, at some point of winning today. Now that's obviously not helped by Max's 10th grid penalty and Checo just being bad. But there are overtaking opportunities, and where those overtaking opportunities are, it's dependent on how brave a driver is feeling. Because you saw Piastri pull off a great move going through Les Combes on on Leclerc. He overtook Perez way before he got to Les Combes, unsurprisingly. And there were, we've seen moves into the bus stop chicane. In the past, we've seen moves sort of like through Blanchimont. I think it was Max in 2015 when he stood on the Toro Rosso, overtook someone through that. I couldn't tell you who off the top of my head. So there are areas where overtakes can be made around this circuit. And with this era of car that we're in, and with how close the top sort of teams are, it did help today. And it's one of those where a fun driver circuit combined with cars that are close together on the track, such as this year, both of those do help. And I think this year was today even was the perfect advertisement of let the teams get the cars sort of just so, let all the teams catch up, and then the circuits will just sort of bring the racing themselves. Every race will have a sort of lull in it. It's very, very rare that we don't have a race that's like the lap after lap is sort of like extreme, like wheel-to-wheel action. That just doesn't happen. But we saw how this race, it laid out its own story, and it built all the foundations in the first stint and then the first two stints for it to become a really, really entertaining and sort of very, very tense finale, because it was the whole will they, won't they, with will Hamilton get past, will Piastri catch, will Russell lock up, will his tyres go off a cliff, all the rest of it. And then, there was the whole thing of, will Norris get past, will Verstappen cut his way through the field? And as we saw this year, it's a no. So, Spa is a fantastic circuit. It's historic and it deserves to stay on the calendar. I think it is important for us sort of fickle F1 fans to remember that not every race is going to be a banger, and we are getting a bit spoiled this year with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now it's a feast. It was a famine earlier on in the year, so it just shows you how quick things can turn around. But yeah, it absolutely deserves to be on the calendar. If it goes after 25, I will be extremely annoyed. And this also comes as well as there are very strong rumours about the Italian Grand Prix under threat, and also the Dutch Grand Prix. Believe it or not, the Dutch Grand Prix, even though they got a triple world champion, guy leading the championship, apparently a packed out house around Zandvoort is not a guarantee of a place on the Formula One calendar these days, which I think is a crying shame. But that's another discussion for another day. The important thing for Spa is that it was a very eventful race today. It was beautiful weather. We had challenging conditions on Saturday for qualifying as well. We had all the four seasons really at Spa. The only things we didn't have was snow, but we're never going to get that at this time of year, thankfully. So let's talk about the team that started on pole position today, and a team that. Given his shirt today, I assume that Dev is very much supporting Ferrari. But I wanted to talk about him today and how their performance was really. I mean, we had Charles Leclerc on pole position. He ended up in fourth place by the end. Carlos Sainz was further down the grid, ended up in seventh. I think he actually started around seventh as well. But how do you rate their performance today, Dev? Because I think it's fair to say, and Charles Leclerc was also saying, that they don't have the fastest car right now. For them to get on pole position and convert it would have been very difficult. But a fourth place in the circumstances, is that good enough really with the equipment they've got?
Certainly not, George. But I would first begin with the fact that you mentioned that I'm still supporting Ferrari. I just don't have a better or a more comfortable T-shirt to wear in this grueling Indian summer. So that's the only reason. But yeah, old habits die hard. The Kimi days. But yeah, I think even if Kimi was to be there himself in attendance, he would have been distraught because, of course, Leclerc, for all the brilliance that he demonstrated yesterday in qualifying and then becoming the de facto pole sitter thanks to the penalties handed out to Verstappen, could be ruining the fact that he was able to become the race leader for no more than 2 laps, because by the end of lap 3, it was Sir Lewis Hamilton in the leadership of the race. And then from there on in, it was just about um, playing catch up to the rest of, the frontal end of the pack of the grid, I would say. Also, a very disappointing day for Carlos Sainz. Started P7, ends P7. I'm not really sure what to make of that. Um, I mean, mathematically, with 14 races, both the drivers have combined in combination taken 10 podiums. Um, Out of these 10 podiums, 2 have culminated in race victories. That's not a great result given all the facilities and the entire paraphernalia and the talent and the experience and the history of making race winning cars at your disposal. I'm certainly sure that Ferrari would be really disgruntled at this moment. But that's just where they are at this point in time. Things were really better a little over a month back in time, a month and a half back in time, when they finished 1 and 2, which interestingly brings me to another point that each of the top 4 teams this season have actually had a 1-2 finish this year, whether it's Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, as we saw today, and of course Ferrari. But if you're Leclerc, you're certainly disappointed that you could not hold on to even a podium despite beginning P1. And yeah, excellent tire strategy, tire management, as seen in the middle of the race by Lewis Hamilton, saw that Leclerc was just basically a spectator. He was not really in the midst of the action. And Sainz, I would say, specifically has to work out one issue, because I mean, I'm an admirer of Carlos Sainz. I've followed his season very closely. Despite pitting for fresh rubber, whether he's put on the hards or the mediums, he's not able to get the tire to perform at the level that he would like. Specifically, if you were to compare it to the performance of George Russell, who immediately sets the purple times, after pitting, or even Oscar Piastri. So that's just something that he would want to take a look at when racing resumes after 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, the pace ultimately is not in the Ferrari car. I mean, you had Charles Leclerc doing an incredible job in qualifying to get his 25th pole position, which is a staggering number. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's got about 5 or 6 Grand Prix wins. So he's got a batting average of like less than 20% pole conversion ratio. And there's a multitude of reasons for that, of course. Ferrari's strategy over the years, I don't think their strategy today was bad. The only thing I would say was a bit odd was how short of a stint Sainz had on the medium tyres for his second stint. But as we saw, because of the high temperatures, the medium tyre was not that good. The hard was definitely the correct one to be on. So yeah, disappointing for Ferrari not even to even get a podium when they started so far up the grid and on with Leclerc's car as well. And something that is just coming to us now on Live on the Grid Talk podcast is incredibly, George Russell, possibly, just going off the information I have in front of me here, might be disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix. He might lose his race win that we were just waxing lyrical about. His car is apparently 1.5 kilograms underweight. If your car is underweight when it's been weighed and the driver is weighed too, you basically get effectively a performance advantage, and that's not allowed in the rules. And the usual punishment for that is a disqualification. Mercedes will need to explain why Russell's car was 1.5 kilograms underweight. Otherwise, he will likely be disqualified. If we hear anything more about this, we'll let you know. But there is an official investigation going on now by the race stewards. When that decision will come, I don't know. But yeah, interesting and scary one for George Russell, really. I did not expect to be reading that partway through this podcast. But yeah, we'll just continue with what we were talking about. So yeah, One thing that was definitely different during this race, Tom, and there's a good reason for it. Obviously, the DRS zone was shortened by, I believe, 75 meters down the Kemmel Straight. That it was actually harder to overtake around Spa. And traditionally, when Verstappen was taking his pretty much yearly engine penalty at this point, they would choose Spa because Spa is the easiest track to overtake around. And I still think it's probably one of the easiest tracks to overtake around. But we didn't see it being easy. We saw cars going into the braking zone by and large, neck and neck, and actually battling through Leclerc. And some people might think, well, that's a bad thing. We've got less overtaking. But to be honest with you, I think it's a good thing. I think it allows for more battling. But what's your take on it?
Just because we have DRS, it doesn't mean that someone should just be able to zoom up and drive past. The DRS, what's called an overtaking aid, it doesn't give you a sort of God-forgiven right to just overtake someone and be done with it. So for me, I did notice the DRS is a little bit further because previously down the Kemmel Straight, we have seen drivers look like sitting ducks and then being caught way before we even get into Les Combes. So we saw it today, and we saw it with Hamilton on the sort of closing laps where he was tucked up behind, the car in front, in this case, his teammate, and he wasn't able to get past because the DRS was just that little bit later. I think it made all the difference today because had it have been where it was before, because before it was practically as you come over the crest of the hill, and you would activate it so early that it would give you such an advantage up there. It would, it meant you would basically be able to absolutely fly down the Kemmel Straight. But today we saw it where it did begin to form a bit of a DRS train, but on the flip side, you've got to weigh it up with, do you want drivers to just be doing DRS overtake after DRS overtake? Because I think if we'd have had a circuit that would have given us just DRS overtake after DRS overtake on both the Kemmel Straight and the pit straight, we wouldn't be having the conversation we'd be having today about how exciting that race was. Because whilst there's an overtaking aid, it doesn't mean you should just go, whoop, yeah, goodbye. Unless you've got a significant car advantage, like if you're one of the top teams overtaking, like a Sauber or a whoever to the back of the grid, like I don't know, probably a Williams today or something. It's it's something where it does still mean that drivers have to put the overtake in themselves, and the driver still has to make the move stick, as we saw with the Piastri move. Because the first time we saw Piastri go to overtake Leclerc through Les Combes, he'd got a good run of DRS, but he didn't quite have enough, and Leclerc deployed enough in his arsenal. Namely, we saw quite a lot of battery deployment from him to defend that position, and that's why I think having that DRS move, what is it, 70, 80 meters up the straight? I think he said 70 meters. I think that's made all the difference today, and I think especially when we look at the sort of 2026 regs where we're moving away from DRS and I think we're going more towards active aero full stop, which is going to be front and rear wings. I think if we can reduce the what's the word I'm looking for? If we can reduce the sort of dependency on DRS to get these kind of overtakes done, it basically means to the driver, look, you've got to get your setup more bob on, and you've got to you've got to manage your tires better, and you've got to you just got to make the overtake stick. So it basically says, look, we need more driver skill to make a job or make an overtake done. And I fully agree that DRS being moved up, shorten the DRS, less dependency on it. Boom, perfect.
Yeah, it's a good thing that we don't need the whacking great DRS straight to actually overtake. It's a good sign. And as well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We saw good battles, and we saw it was quite close between the top four teams and the top eight, really in a class of their own. Like we saw all the way back earlier in the season, we've not really seen it be this obvious for a long time. And the downside of that, though, really, Dev, is that drivers like Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, realistically, all they could hope for was the so-called best of the rest position, which in the past used to be P7 when we had a top three of Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari. But McLaren have joined that group too, so now it's actually a P9. But what do you think about Alonso this season? I know you're a big fan of him, and it's an interesting place he finds himself in right now. I mean, he's miles clear of his teammate. He's got pretty much double the points of his teammate in Aston Martin. Aston Martin not doing anything like what they should be doing this season. And Alonso probably still feels betrayed, quite frankly, by Stroll after the incident in Hungary, where he didn't let him back through despite the team orders. So what's your take on the Spanish Samurai in 24 so far?
It's been hugely disappointing, because let us remember that around this time last year, he had no fewer than 7 podium finishes to his name, which included 3 consecutive podiums at Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Austria, which was also followed up with a very competitive P4 at, I think, Azerbaijan it was. But then, yeah, there hasn't really been a solitary podium for Alonso this year. And if you actually were to just look into his results, where the last 5 Grand Prix are concerned, then you'll realize that he's only been able to score a top 10 finish on 2 occasions. His recent best being that P8 at Great Britain, that not too many people really thought too mighty off, and because of course there were more dominance back then. Austria, a P18, and then 11th at Hungary for little fault of his own, and now just managing 2 points and just finishing maybe 5.5 seconds ahead of Daniel Ricciardo, who actually was 2.5 seconds behind Esteban Ocon. Hence, he would have scored 1 point. So it's not really gone Alonso's way, but just to think in retrospect how far this great guy from Spain has come, the great legend from Asturias, Oviedo. He needs, I think, 6 more races, 6 or 7 more races to then register 400 Grand Prix entries. And I think that's a monumental number. He had 391 starts and 394 race entries. So that you put 6 more, and that's 400. And I think that's a monumental number. And actually, tomorrow he turns 43, so his birthday is coming up. He would want to, just spend this precious little time to just realign with himself, with his ceaseless reserves of energy, being the samurai, and come back strongly. And actually, he continued to push Aston Martin, because he's now committed to that team. And Lance Stroll's father believes as much in him as he does in his own son. So it's the classic case of Alonso continuing to be the grand old samurai of the sport, compared to the talented youngster he's up against, who has actually improved in his qualifying form, at least as seen recently. But so much still out there for Fernando Alonso to work out.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation that Alonso finds himself in, and you're absolutely right. He is signed on with Aston Martin until 2026, as is Lance Stroll as well. So they're going to be teammates for quite some time. And I wonder if he's regretting signing that contract extension, especially with there being a seat at Alpine. But then again, Alpine's a bit of a basket case, but it would mean teaming up with his old mate Flavio. But that is a conversation for a very different podcast. Yeah, I will. I mean, I was going to do an amazing segue there, but I can't really think of one right now, to be honest. So I'll just say, if you're enjoying this podcast, guys, which I hope you are, we would really appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star rating on both Spotify and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts too. Also, if you're one of the 72% of people who aren't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please consider us helping us out with a like and a subscribe. Like I said, we go over quite a few of these shows actually coming out live after the event, and this is one of them. Had some breaking news with George Russell just before. Let's see if anything happens in the rest of the show too. But yeah, join the conversation on the live chat as well. We always want to hear your opinions on there. But yeah, so kind of on that, what I just said, at the moment, Mercedes have a 1-2 anyway. That may not last for too much longer. But with that in mind, Tom, something I wanted to ask is, are Mercedes in the hunt for the Constructors' Championship? Before this race in the preview, I said they weren't. I said that this gap is too large, but they've got some momentum behind them, but that is still a big old gap to Red Bull. 120 points it is at the moment. But with a 1-2 and with a good strategy, and of course, they are very experienced. They are with Red Bull, they're the only team really that are experienced at winning championships. So are they in that fight?
No. Sorry to burst your bubble, mate. But yeah, that's no. They're on 284 points at the minute, and Red Bull is on 404 points. I think realistically, it's McLaren and Ferrari who are in the hunts against Red Bull. But if McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes all start scrapping for points, as we sort of saw today, all that's going to do is let Red Bull sort of extend their lead. We saw it. One thing I noticed actually at the end of the race today, when Max is getting weighed, I do have a point on this, I swear. Max, when the camera panned him when he was getting weighed in Parc Ferme, he just let out a little wry smile as Lando walked past, so he knew that it was still a net win for him this weekend because he just gently extended his sort of points lead. And I think Red Bull won't have extended that points lead over McLaren today because Piastri finished third. But I think if this sort of like the way the season has sort of exploded, it sort of happened really with Norris's win in Miami, you could say. I think if Merck would have been in the hunt sooner, if Merck would have been in the hunt around then, and if they would have been getting sort of semi-regular podiums, finishing fourth, fifth, all the rest of it, then quite possibly we'd be looking at a different story. Because if Mercedes were on 310, 320 points right now, for another sort of 40 to 50 points higher up, I'd be saying most definitely, because they're taking points off Ferrari sort of fairly consistently at the moment. So I think Mercedes are in a realistic scrap for second. But I don't think they're really within touching distance to Red Bull up in first. Having said that, this season has already thrown up all manner of things. And after we thought we were going to be in for another season of, Max Verstappen dominance, it's been anything but as of Miami onwards. So, I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm saying I don't think it will. I think they could get close. And depending on what happens with that second Red Bull seat, if it gets sort of auctioned off at Sotheby's or something, then maybe we could have that's a very British reference. Maybe we could have a second, a different sort of second driver in that seat. But as for Mercedes catching, for first in the constructors, I don't see it happening. But I think all four of those constructors' positions could maybe go down to the wire this season. So we could be in for a bit of a sort of constructors' battle in the last one or two races of the season.
Yeah, I never in a month of Sundays would have expected after the first 5 races for it to be, the prospect of this. This was around the kind of point in the season where it'd be signed, sealed, and delivered, really, for Red Bull and Max Verstappen. But I still think Verstappen is more than the heavy favorite, especially since, like you said, he did gain on his closest rival, Lando Norris. I hesitate to call him a proper title rival just because that gap is still massive, but Norris is still P2 in the championship. But there's absolutely a battle on in the Constructors' Championship. McLaren closing that gap, 43 points now, which, that's literally, that could close up even more in the next couple of weekends or so. It depends a lot what happens in the summer break as well. If Red Bull finally get their act together, really, when it comes to upgrades, I think that's their Achilles heel. They had an upgrade for Hungary that just didn't work, didn't make any sort of real difference, to be honest. So they'll be hoping they can have this summer break to kind of rest and recharge and come back swinging in Zandvoort. But yeah, on that, Dev, I wanted to get your kind of take on it as well. Verstappen today, after he qualified in P11, especially since he qualified a good, at least 6/10 ahead of Charles Leclerc in qualifying, he was absolutely on another level in those conditions. I still expected him to be very close to the win or fighting for the win. But like I think Tom said earlier, Red Bull was really the only constructor out of the top 4 to not really get that close to winning today. Perez was the closest to winning today off the line, but that quickly fell apart for him, unfortunately, because Hamilton got past. But is P5 today a good result for Max? Is he going to be happy with that, especially with, unfortunately, how he's been acting on the radio in the last race? Today, he seemed a lot calmer. He seemed like he was a lot more temperate, really. But I guess maybe a reason for it is the fact that he still beat Lando Norris.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was probably because Crofty didn't call him up and remind him of his sim racing in the previous Grand Prix. But on a serious note, I think it's still not a very bad result because he began from 11th on the grid and then eventually that P5. I think if you talk about Red Bull specifically speaking, then the person who needs to really worry and pick himself up somehow has to be Perez. He found himself again outperformed by so many, and, and he did score a P7, I think, in the previous Grand Prix. I think it was Hungary where he scored a P7, unless I'm very much mistaken. But again, to have begun from the front end and then to manage an eighth is, and then to actually finish behind not the quickest Ferrari being driven by Carlos Sainz should be like bitter disappointment. And Tom was earlier talking about whether Mercedes can actually beat Red Bull. I think I'm not sure if Tom would agree. I think the only way in which that can happen is if Perez continues to non-perform and Verstappen continues to, play the lone hand that he's been playing so far in helping his team usurp their on-grid rivals. But I won't read too much into today's result as being that bit of a negative for Max Verstappen. It's still a top five finish, and but he has, I think, woken up to the fact. He's widen awake to the fact that the one key team which stands in his way, in his and Red Bull's way of running away with the drivers and the constructors championship, then it is Lando Norris effectively from McLaren. So I think their focus now has to, as you said, to function on the upgrades, to improve, to continue to just dish out those spectacular qualifying times, and then just continue to build up on the fastest lap times, and then definitely find that much needed support from the driver in the other Red Bull, um, who can only be at best described as a talented Mexican driver right now, who perhaps is riding on his luck given the contract extension. But then it would be interesting to see some shenanigans from Dr. Marco with reference to Perez. I don't know what's to come.
I don't think Perez knows what's to come either. I think all the Red Bull kind of drivers, apart from Verstappen, are going into the summer break not knowing where they're going to be driving or if they're going to be driving when we head to Zandvoort in 4 weeks. But yeah, it's a fascinating situation with Perez. We've already done quite a bit talking about him. But yeah, Verstappen with a P5 gains on Lando Norris. I think that's his main aim. To be fair, at the moment, that's what it's going to be with the pace of the car, which is not the best, obviously. But yeah, let's talk about driver of the day. Let's give our driver of the day. So the official driver of the day today for Grid Talk was George Russell. Obviously, this is before any potential penalties and disqualifications and stuff, so we're not really going to take that into account. But Tom, who's your driver of the day today? Who impressed you the most?
My driver of the day is I'm going to stick with George Russell because of what he's achieved. I mean, with an underweight car, maybe not, but let's wait until we see what comes from the FIA. I am refreshing the FIA docs website, so as and when something comes about, we will obviously update everybody. Yes, I'm going to stick with George Russell because making the one-stop strategy work, as I talked about earlier, marvelous. Special mention to Oscar Piastri, who I think has really started to hone his racecraft, because before he would have burnt those tires to oblivion. But now he's beginning to look much more the sort of finished, the sort of whole package, if you like. So yeah, Russell, honourable mention to Piastri.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point with Piastri because the one thing that he didn't have in his locker really was his tyre conservation compared to Norris, but he did an excellent job today in challenging in hot circumstances at Spa. So there we go. Dev, who was your driver today? Who impressed you the most?
Well, of course, George Russell was in scintillating form. Another defensive masterclass from the man from Kings Lynn, who drove quite like a king today. But for me, it'll have to be Oscar Piastri. He's been in some tremendous form as seen recently. He scored 12 points after his 12 points at Great Britain, 25 points, the race winner at Hungary, then again 15 vital points for McLaren. If you talk about the overall driver standing, then he has gone past Carlos Sainz. He's on P4, which is a great place to be at. He's just 10 points shy of Charles Leclerc. So I think he's clearly emerging as this threatening force where the top 3, top 4 in the standings are concerned. And just for a guy who really has not much experience to his name to be, able to drive in such commanding fashion at a very challenging and a high-speed track like Spa was an incredible sight for me, I would say.
Yeah, me too. I'd definitely go along with that as well. Piastri and Russell definitely stand out. I know I mentioned though to Sir Lewis to drive as well as he did today. I mean, the lead driver on the two-stop strategy looked an absolute shoo-in for the win with how he was going. Just couldn't quite get it done in the end, but he may end up with a win from that. We don't know at the moment, unfortunately. Things are still being decided in the stewards' room, and knowing Formula One, just about the only thing that's not fast in Formula One are stewards' decisions, especially, to be fair, something like this. This is rather important. This isn't some relatively trivial thing. This literally, this can and will change the race, potentially, as Murray Walker used to say. God bless his soul. But yeah, I would personally go on with George Russell for driver of the day if he keeps it, but I'd probably give it to Sir Lewis if not. But Oscar Piastri definitely an honorable mention too. But yeah, so Tom, we've got a sister show. We've had Formula 2 and Formula 3 this weekend. Care to give a few words about Formula Talk?
Yeah, so Formula Talk is our sort of sister show, come feeder show, if you'd like. It's unsurprisingly, it covers all things sort of feeder series, so F2, F3, F1 Academy. It is hosted by our very own Sophia Richmond, and I for a while was co-host. I have had to step back because I just can't do it with work commitments. It's recorded usually during the week. Sophia has been away, which is why we haven't had any shows. But yeah, it's if you'd like to listen to it, it's everywhere that you can find Grid Talk. So that's across all our socials and then all our audio platforms and everything.
Yeah, it's a great show. I really enjoy it. And yeah, this week I've seen the action from F2 and F3 this week, and it's been very eventful. But that's all I will say on the matter, because I imagine Sophia will be covering that, potentially with me as well. I'll be trying to make some more appearances on there. Dev, I mentioned that you're a Formula One writer and also cover other sports and other things as well. Is there anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I have the absolute pleasure of being the co-founder of F1 Chronicle, thanks to Jared. And it's great to write a few Formula One pieces on another website called Cairo Sports. That's KYROSPORTS.com. And yeah, I cover cricket for my digital publication called Korat Point. So pretty much Formula One and cricket for me here.
Yeah, definitely check out Dev's work. He's a very passionate writer. I always enjoy reading his stuff, even on cricket, which I have to admit, I'm not really someone who watches that, but I get a good understanding from reading Dev's articles. So definitely go check those out. Yeah, and I mean, Dev just mentioned the F1 Chronicle there. If you want to hear and see more from me, I do a lot of videos for the F1 Chronicle as well as Football Chronicle and the other chronicles in the group as well, covering a variety of topics. And I will probably be recording a video about why George Russell might be disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix very shortly, because that's a developing story. So imagine a few people are going to be talking about it. If you want to see and hear more from Grid Talk, though, it's available on YouTube, where most of the episodes are recording live, including this one, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search for the F1 Grid Talk for our big back catalogs of shows as well, including previews and reactions to qualifying and race results. Don't do qualifying nowadays, but we do cover sprints as well as some interview episodes on Firesides too. And if you want to support the channel financially as well, you can head over to Patreon to help support the show. We've got some new tiers for that coming very soon if they're not already in place. So do check those out if you're interested in getting some perks as a fan of the show. Also, make sure you subscribe and follow to be the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. We are heading to the summer break now. I imagine the first show in the summer break will be to cover the mid-season driver grades. So we'll see who's been excelling and who has been failing in that one. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to Grid Talk, presented by Bet Online. Thank you to my panelists for joining me. I will see you for the next one. Goodbye.